Hi, I'm mostly doing this as an exercise in unscripted video because I can never come up with the next line. But this is a nicely chronological story that you might just possibly find interesting. I'm going to tell you about my history as a Pokémon fan. Pokemon is really important to a lot of people my age and a few ages older and every age younger. And that must be pretty baffling to outsiders. It must be how I feel when people make constant Harry Potter references as if that's something worth taking seriously, like it's Pokemon or something. But it's a brilliant thing and I stand by it. Bits when I'm over here at the reshoot, where I say things that I thought to say whilst editing that first shoot. But you can also have a bit of ankle action. I'm aware it's a bit funny that I'm making apologia for being a fan of the world's most popular franchise. I can't make it out to be some minority outsider thing. I just want to try describing something enthusiastically. Playground crazes came and went in my childhood, and I never much got swept by the tide of them. But then when Pokemon was a thing, I thought, this one I really respect, this one I can go for. To my memory, Digimon came first. I know that's not internationally true. Prior to both, there was Tamagotchi, which I never had. Digimon seemed like the battle version of Tamagotchi. The kids on the playground who'd had birthdays at convenient times or generous pocket money or stole one had one. And I did kind of admire the way it made a competitive game that you can hone with your homework. But never ended up getting one. I guess my birthday didn't come around at the right time for that craze. But then Pokemon. I can't remember what my first experience of it was between the video games, the trading card game, and the anime. I'm gonna place my bet on trading card game. And again, similarly, I liked how it was this mathematically competitive game. But the thing is, no one fucking played it. People just swapped cards and thought the one with the higher number on it is evidently the better card. And just let's do it that way. I assembled good decks, but I just didn't have anyone else who was interested in playing it, which is why I really dug the video game of the card game, Friend Simulator. There's a lot of stuff in my life where it's something inherently multiplayer and I'll invest in it just on the chance that I ever have appropriate friends, and probably not really. That's a resonant theme throughout life. Because I was an overachiever kid and thereby a bit of a contextual teacher's pet. I remember my year 4 teacher, who was a very, sober, grey man with that kind of dry wit, saw me participating in Pokemon cards at playtime or whatever and said, "Oh, Colin, not you too." And I did my best to stick up for myself. I was like, I can qualify this. Wait until 2020 and I'll do a video about it. I did pretty decent at the trading market anyway because I found an extra resource that other kids liked, which was posters, i.e. just photocopied bits of Pokemon picture paper. Oh, if I just admitted to copyright infringement in front of Nintendo on YouTube. So I used those as swapping currency. I show trading cards in a separate video at some point, maybe. I gave up around Generation 4. Then, sometime around then, the kids who had the satellite channels got to see some of the anime. Eventually it came to ITV, the public channel. I generally dug the early anime. I mean, it was always pretty hokey from day one, and it's got so much filler and one really big weakness in it called Ash. I really dislike that trope that was definitely true throughout my childhood cartoon shows of the protagonist being a hot-headed boy. That confident and brash and emotive persona, there's nothing to relate to there. Never trust the main character. But still, throughout Generation 1, it had a relatively reasonable pace. You know, the filler was only about 50% instead of 80 to 90%. In the other 50%, it actually went through a reasonably compelling story about traveling through a region and encountering all different kinds of species, and it occasionally had a slightly reasonable interpretation of the battle dynamic of the games. It's a shame how much it descended into filler, because I really like the aesthetics of Johto, but it was just way too drawn out. They should make a reduced version of the story, distilled into the actual relevant bits, not just the repetitive male match plot points, and do it without Ash. In fact, the bits of the anime that I like the most are the bits without Ash. Enough on that, though I guess I'll get back to the movies. I guess my first encounter with the games was one of those end-of-term days when you can bring in toys, and someone had Gen 1 Pokemon, and I solved a forest or cave puzzle for him. But yeah, I really dug the concept of the games. When I'd saved up like 2 Christmases and a birthday or something, it was like £20 each was the main gift of those. I eventually got a Game Boy Pocket and Pokemon Yellow, which at the time was the new version, and it had like prettier sprites. Although some regret in choosing that version. Pikachu's got nothing on the original starters, and I don't like the anime-based focus. I like Jesse and James. Of course I like Jesse and James. Yeah, I know that you get all of the starters in Pokemon Yellow, and they were probably all in my team by then. Actually, not Charizard, because I did use Farfetch'd for Fly. But still, that's a cop-out. In fact, in one of the cases, a cop hands it out. It's a really well-made video game franchise in total, at least up until recent years. And if you encountered Pokemon Gen 1 games at the end of the 20th century, you'd probably see why. It's an inventive, colourful world that appeals to the animal lover in us, and maybe asks that animal lover to ignore all the parallels to dogfighting. There's a really satisfying maths to it, and compared to other video games, it doesn't rely on reaction times, which is really useful for me. I did get the Pokemon Pikachu, the Tamagotchi-like toy, and I carried that everywhere for so long that it does need a mention. Even though I really don't care for Pikachu itself, it was still an endearing Pokemon product. I just remembered I was going to do like a generation counter thing over here. I think a lot of the appeal is the many customizable permutations. Like, I really dug any video game with a make your own bit. And whilst Pokemon didn't yet explicitly have that, it was still all about that. You got hundreds of species, 100 levels, hundreds of moves, and you make your own combination of those elements. Similarly with the trading card game. And similarly, I have very little memory of actually playing it competitively with anyone, like part of the whole idea of Pokemon was connectivity. And I loved that in theory, but in practice, it was quite solo. Pokemon nicknames are a really nice customization touch. I would do nickname themes for each playthrough. Like, one time I made sure they were all non-noun words. I've incorporated, foreign words and the foreign names for Pokemon to kind of get used to those. One time they had to all be pronounceable anagrams of the species name. So every time I caught one, that was a bit of a challenge to come up with something. There's plenty of times when I just did awkward puns, of course. One time I acted like I'd just been handed the designs, the visual designs of the Pokemon without their names, and asked to come up with a Pokemon name for them. So the kind of base portmanteau pun that they use. Then when they upped the character limit from 10 letters to 12, I did a playthrough where they were all they were human names. A first name and a surname. Credible, plain people's names from a variety of cultures. But I've petered out on that. Petered out would be a good name. I don't concentrate time on video games as much now, and I'm slightly paranoid that I just won't learn the new species names. I'm sure a lot of us in generations 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 knew everything about every species and could name them in order. Yeah, that's hard to keep track of now. Maybe the habit of nicknaming them lost its whimsy for me and became a bit of a chore. But it's still a good example of the personality the game allows you to interpret. I did go and see the movie whilst the initial Pokemon craze in the UK was still hot. At the time, the first movie, I didn't really dig it. I mean, it was cool to see Dumbfan at the start and the extended version of the song, but all that saccharine stuff about crying and that Brother, My Brother song, being about Ash and, just being in the shape of a movie. What is it with movies? In retrospect, it is probably the best Pokemon film until Detective Pikachu. And yeah, I also saw movies 2 and 3 in the cinema. And by 3, the initial craze in the UK was really past. That seems negligible in retrospect, but it did stand out at the time, like I was weird for still liking Pokemon. There was a kid who bullied me, who said, it's a childish craze, and I said, in that way that kids do, I bet you an arbitrarily high amount of money that we wouldn't ever have, £1 million, that kind of citation, that I'll still be a fan when I'm 20, which, nobody expects to live until 20, but at the time, as an 8 or 9-year-old or whatever, I figured, of course, as an adult, I'd still be residually fond of something I liked as a child, or maybe even ironically fond of it, which still counts as a fondness. Ultimately, it turned out I was just still really into Pokemon, and I never got that £1 million, can you tell? I've got some things down here to remind me what to talk about, and the spin-off games were pretty good. That's a really well-made pinball game, but still a pinball game. Generation 2 is such a gorgeous game. When you already do something pretty well, so then the next time you do it, it is excellent. A victory lap, that'll do. Just took everything that was already strong about Pokemon and added on the lovely aesthetic of Johto. And it just felt like a really expanded world. I wasted so much time on that game. It is true of Generation 1 as well, but this is the first time I've remembered to mention it. It's one of those video games where every element of it is beautiful. The sprite work, let's say the sprite overworld and battle are separate bits. The mechanics and the music, you'd think in a team working together to make something like that, there'd be a weak link, but that was not. I ended up getting both gold and silver because I enjoyed it so much, but not crystal because that required you to have the Game Boy Color pretty arbitrarily. To people not familiar with this setup, Pokemon tends to release 2 games at a time that are nearly identical. It's relatively admirable, but a bit capitalist too. The intention is so that different players get different experiences and different available Pokemon, and they have to cooperate to help each other to fill in the gaps. But the result is often a lot more sales. And then often a year or 2 later, there's a new version of nearly the same game with some additions. They can often really optimize stuff. Pokemon Platinum really fixed a lot of the flaws of Diamond and Pearl, and Black and White 2 made it a lot less linear and limited. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I checked those games every day for the daily tasks and rewards for probably 2 years or more. I kept training in that training house against Cal, who shows up if you don't have any friends. I did manage to get an official event Celebi. The family were driving close enough to some major city toy store where there was that promotion for me to convince them to stop on by there. Events used to be hosted at major cities like that and is pretty exclusionary to players who can't get there. I dislike there being locked out content that enables for the privileged. That Celebi is now, of course, lost to a dead battery, the curse of a game with a clock in it. No one should miss out on the immersive magic of Generation 2 Pokemon. It's just really nice. And if it feels a bit aged now, then there are remakes from a decade later, although maybe they feel a bit aged now as they are a decade ago too. Shit. By Generation 3, the fad had really run its course as far as my generation was concerned. And there was a really tangible element at the time. I was still into Pokemon, but it was still something I couldn't engulf in as much. engulfing. Compared to the first two gens, it is a lot more of a mixed bag. You know, there's great stuff to it, and there's the Pokemon designs that are basically repeats. Generation 3, I didn't actually get the game on release. Maybe I didn't have a GBA yet, but I did at some point. Speaking from a position of relative privilege now, but you might remember from childhood, you didn't just get things when they came out. Like, you got things occasionally when you could afford them. A friend who ended up with copies of both Ruby and Sapphire lent me his Ruby, and of course I appreciated that, but maybe being a borrowed playthrough made me not connect as much. Or maybe I just aged out of the innocent joy that I got from Generations 1 and 2. I'm still pretty good. I don't care for contests, but I like double battles. That might be my whole chronological story to Gen 3. Like, I did still have that one playthrough, but it was largely something I caught up with a few years later. Really, Gen 4 felt ages later. I don't know if it was. I'll go and find the stats on how long each generation lasted. But it was also around the time that my generation of real humans could get past shaming people who are still into a childhood fad and admit it's a worthy thing to still be interested in. Because it's just good. I mean, good isn't exactly the word for the Generation 4 games, but still Pokemon. I did put a lot of time into Diamond and replayed that Elite Four so many times and actually filled the Pokédex for once, which is the one time I've done that. A fun anecdote for Generation 4. I lent my Nintendo DS and Pokemon Diamond to a friend for a full playthrough, with the caveat that she couldn't overwrite my precious save file, because that had the Pokemon I'd raised. It had a nearly full Pokédex. So she played through the whole thing without having to save, you know, just folded the console shut every now and then just aborted it and willingly lost all her Pokemon when it got to the autosave bit at the end credits. She was a fun anecdote in another video. She's just a fun anecdote in general. She does appear in one of my videos. And since the world was a lot more online by then, I did make friends with other fans online. There's this defunct online Pictionary clone that ran on Macromedia Shockwave called iSketch, where you could have custom word lists. I did submit some word lists, but it's now dead for now. But yeah, I spent a lot of time drawing Pokemon to people on the internet on the Pokemon word list. You know, tuning back, now I remember that, to Generation 1 especially, but I think just one of the general strengths of Pokemon that it hasn't always kept up, but still part of the initial really strong appeal to it was cute animal creatures that kids can draw. I drew a lot of pencil Pokemon in my childhood, and yeah, maybe I designed my own. I remember a constantly pixelated gorilla that was kind of like the 2D version of Porygon. I might have been just going for the pun, but it was called Goridlock. More recently, when I decided that should finally be a pure flying type, I made Aviaper. But still, the actual Pokemon have cute and interesting and yet simple and replicable shapes that I think really resonate with a child's and even an adult's imagination. But this isn't Gen 4 content. You know what is? These remakes, and they brought the same feeling as the original Gold and Silver. Again, they are such lovely games. I liked the new bits, I liked the Pokeathlon and the Pokewalker. It's such an innovative franchise. I think I've always been more into handheld video games, partially because I never had like command of the TV, so it was something private to me. But also the way it was relatively limited by, you know, contextually outdated tech. You'd say the Game Boy is kind of parallel to the NES. I feel that those slightly retro bounds encouraged a bit more inventiveness and less following the trend of video games becoming more and more like Angry Man simulators. I mean, I like Doom, of course I like Doom, but Nintendo and Sega to some extent always had a relative innocence where they didn't have to chase the tide of being masculine and cool like that and could be a bit more colourful and inventive. And Yeah, I know I've just travelled from describing handhelds to describing Nintendo. I actually didn't have a home Nintendo console as a child, but I caught up on them later. And I may as well get to those now. So the N64 games are all great, of course. Stadiums 1 and 2, I mean, just having the battle dynamic play out on a 3D field with your Pokémon brought to life is really satisfying, and it's got a nice challenge single player mode, and it's got those lovely mini games that I could waste so much time on if I had 3 friends. Similarly-ish, the Colosseum games. Well, not that similarly. They have a separate thing going on. They have a satisfying diesel punk vibe. It's interesting to see more mature concepts introduced to the world of Pokemon. They're a good thing to play through once, and maybe eventually ever again, I don't know. Compared to the stadiums, they do lack rental Pokemon, you know, they could have just implemented that, and the kind of interactive fun of the minigames. I like Pokeathlon. I just really dig minigames. They should make a Pokeathlon full game at some point. I just remembered an additional element of Generation 4 that I didn't cover. There are a lot of spin-off games for that. I mean, the first Ranger game was Generation 3, but the good ones were Generation 4. The first one. But these are pretty cool and pretty. They bring action to Pokemon. They're quite good and just not essential. I didn't get the box out, but Troze is really good as well. It's a really well-designed puzzle mechanic that's up there with Puzzle Fighter, but its sequels, if you call those the sequels, you can't call those the sequels. Completely squander the concept. They get rid of the thing about moving stuff across, so you can't set up a proper series. It's just a really bland game that feels like, you know, mobile phone malware. As well as just drawing stuff, I would pixel draw stuff. On the Windows 95 home computer we had, there was Visual Basic, and I would do my best to program Pokemon-related games. There is a bit of a later one made on Click and Play called Diglett that I've made a video about, but there were loads of lost ones where I used Pokemon assets, or I did generally draw a lot of sprites and just do my best to make an interesting game. I don't know who for, I just liked game design. I'm pretty good at like programming in a 90s field. It's just progressed too much since then into a 3D realm I can't get a grip around. But if the 90s are recruiting for game designers, I would so get that. Maybe the 80s. Then Gen 5. And I've got to admit, that was around the time that I kind of lost touch with the franchise a bit. I did get the games on their release, but it just felt less essential to my life by then. Maybe because I link my enjoyment to Pokemon a lot with the visual aesthetics, and Gen 5 had a bit of an awkward cyberpunk vibe, and again, it repeated designs. It's very admirable that they did the thing of just rebooting and saying, here's a batch of brand new Pokemon and you won't see the old ones until after the main game is finished. Because it's like, we've travelled to a new continent. The wild species there are completely different. But not completely different, and a lot of the new designs sucked. But a good few of them were very good. It's the best story of a Pokemon game. It is really well designed in general. I know both consensus and an objective outlook describes Pokemon Generation 5 as really good games, but I just wasn't feeling it as much. It was okay, it was still Pokemon. I've said that again. But it felt that it was no longer a thing that spoke absolutely to me, and that's okay, it doesn't always have to. Gen 5 spin-offs, Conquest is really good. I think this is a US copy and I pre-ordered it because it came out in the US much earlier than in Europe. I like turn-based strategy when a game is like a complexified version of chess. Yes, I know chess is complex. I like Advance Wars. This combines that with Pokemon and a nice feudal Japan vibe, using actual historical characters. It's good stuff, but there are massive structural flaws to this game that make it a bit dodgy to recommend. To complete it properly is ridiculous. I'll do some text splash about that This is a far more disposable spin-off game. I mean, we're getting into the era of disposable spin-off games. It became mobile games pretty soon. It's still arcadey fun, but I can't pretend I've got anything to say about it. Generation 6, I do not have a plush for. In fact, none of the more recent generations. I've got this Horloger charm though. Kind of surprisingly, Generation 6 got me back into it. I did and do really love this. I feel the colors are bright again. The 3D world just makes it a lot more immersive. You know, it was the time for Pokemon to catch up with 3D. It's kind of a shame that 3D's always the end game like that, but it did good for Pokemon. It made your protagonist customizable. And yeah, the world of colors felt nice to explore. I really liked the vibe of France and Paris, but on an objective analysis of the arc of the series, this is a huge cutoff point where Pokemon kind of stopped innovating and the gimmicks felt pretty shoddy, you know, mega evolution, and it just became way too easy. I don't dictate that video games have to be hard, but the mathematical nature of Pokemon, it has to actually involve that, you know, so there is a challenge, so there's something to reward, rather than just blindly press A lot and you'll probably succeed, which sadly the series has gone that way, dumbed down. But still, aesthetically, Gen 6, I'm really into it. Despite playing many keen playthroughs, I never encountered a random shiny Pokemon until Generation 6, and not fully random because I bred for it. It was shiny Beldum. But that was post-playthrough, so I didn't exactly use it. I kind of wouldn't exactly get into the meta game. I'm there to participate in the story. It's all about the Pokemon world building for me. Somehow the Gen 3 remakes, I just didn't engage as much. I think maybe by that time I'd played through repeats of Generation 3 enough already. Don't remember what my team on it was. It kind of felt halfway to homework. I'm sorry. Gen 7 kind of blurs into Gen 6, doesn't it? But it was all about taking those elements and mixing it up and having a bit more of an action game. And thus, it was a fun, engaging, but short-lived game with a nice Hawaiian aesthetic. Ultra felt like a real cop-out. It felt like they handed it to the junior designers. They handed the preceding completed game and just said, see what you can attach to this to make people believe it's a new game. I mean, I know that's generally the principle they've done with third versions since the start, but Platinum and Black 2 were really big improvements. Incidentally, my copy of Ultra Sun was stolen, robbed, burgled with my 3DS before I finished the playthrough, and I've got no energy to get another copy. You know what else is Generation 7? Pokemon Go. The reason I finally got a smartphone, and something I've been addicted to since the start. I mean, it's very much busy work to keep you occupied, but I'm a depressed kid who needs to be kept occupied. This game has basically kept me alive the past few years, and I will never forgive it for that. It gets me out of the house. I've engaged with the local community of Pokemon Go players, and I really appreciate that. I'm still on it all the time because it's just a new iteration of Pokemon, isn't it? The craze that I knew I would actually commit to. And that's still true with Go. Like, there was that summer when everyone was playing it for a bit, and then it was a bit embarrassing to still be playing it. Not that I register embarrassment. Have you seen my YouTube? But just like the overall arc of Pokemon back in the early 2000s, I'd say it's kind of got past that bit and it's just a dignifiable enough hobby. Let's Go really exaggerates what I was saying about Pokemon being dumbed down a bit, but that it's so overtly the intention of that game, it's pretty justifiable. I do have Pokken, and I like that. I'd play that with someone if I had a friend. Then Sword and Shield, the first properly for the Switch games. People say about Sword and Shield that it could have put more effort in to have a vaster world, that the wild area is a way too simplified version of what used to be Roots, that it feels rushed, and all that stuff is true. I don't really get the Dexit stuff. I don't really care if every single Pokemon that was already designed is available in a new game. That cutoff point had to come at some point, and I'm surprised it took this long. Really, the Gen 5 reboot felt a bit like it was doing that anyway. I kind of think for the franchise in the long term, it could be split into two kinds of game. One that's basically Stadium, that can access all the existing Pokemon designs, and you can trade things into there from the new generation story, which is one that's told. Now, we've not yet got that, so I can't yet justify that. I think in the long term, that's a reasonable way to have it be a kind of world, and each new game, each new generation shows you a different part of that world. It's evident from how I've described these games that I'm really into them being different areas of a world. And Sword and Shield did really well at bits of that. It's just great in the age of 3D games that you can see the Pokemon in the overworld, which, you know, was always hinted, but took a while to be technologically viable. Again, though, way too easy. I think I would have to advocate for a difficulty level switch between, like, serious and casual. Oh, I don't want to be that kind of guy. Between a game that actually rewards the thought you put into it and a linear visual novel. Because it's not a game of actions and reactions, it's a game of strategy. And the way they've made it since Gen 5 doesn't have to involve strategy at all. It's just a pleasant walk in the park, which I also like, but not quite as much. So I knew I would stay loyal to Pokemon as a kid, past the age of 20, and even here in late middle age. I guess I had presumed that it would become a turn-of-the-century relic, you know, it would be looked back at as a passing fad, but one that I was still fond of, and not literally the world's most successful franchise ever, doing even better now, that had a big cultural moment a few years ago. But you can see why its popularity has sustained. My angle on enjoying Pokemon is clearly oriented toward the world building. It's a well-defined alternative universe where the strangers who assault you just want to see what pets you have. I think the main thing is how it's written for the sense of wonder and written by the sense of wonder. A love of animals, of cooperation, and of exploration. Okay, I think I've put enough time into this. This probably won't be my only Pokemon enthusing video, but thanks for bothering to listen. Catch you later.